the various sugyas that we will have regarding ERUVIN. Okay, so Chavra, we began on DAF Beis. We're focusing on the first din in the Mishnah that speaks about the Machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. What is the height, the maximum height in which the koida will function, will be good? If the koida, if the crossbeam was higher than that, then it will not be good. So the Tanakama gave the shid that if it's higher than 20 amas, the koida no longer functions. And Rav is suggesting that koida works midin Pesach, and as actually Rav quoted the Braisa on the Beis Amud Beis, that the Braisa uses the words in the Tanakama that we compare any opening to the Pischoi Shel Heichal. The Pesach of the Heichal was 20 amas high. So if you have a koida, then it's called a Pesach. And because it's called a Pesach, it's considered completely sectioned off. So we left off in that sugya. We're going to begin today working out details, as we explained, that the ulam was double the height and double the width. The Pesach of the ulam was double the height and width than the Pesach of the Heichal. And why was it so? So the presumption that will remain in our sugya, that is so because you need to have a Pesach going into the Heichal. As we learned even yesterday, the pasuk says regarding the Shlamim that Ushachatay Pesach Oyel Moed. Now the question is, if we learn din Pesach, like Rav is saying, like it actually says in Abraisa, from the Pischoi Shel Ulam, so there are going to be various details regarding the koida that might not seem to be aligned. Then we're going to go on to the sheet of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that disagrees with Rav, and he holds that koida functions mishum hekeda. It doesn't have to have a din of Pesach, based on the fact that if something is enclosed from three sides, that's the way you will learn. Shitas Reiv Rishonim. It has a din Rishus HaYachid Mida Oiraisa, and the only fear is Midrabanan that a person might somehow mistake the Mavi to the Rishus Harabim, and therefore making a heker suffices. But physically, people, when something is above 20 amas, according to the Tanakama, they don't properly notice it. Now, appreciate the fact that according to Rav Nachman by Yitzchak's approach, the reason behind the dinim that we're learning in ERUVIN, as we learned yesterday, the parallel Mishnah and Sukkah are mamish the same. Because by Sukkah, certainly, the din over there of the schach being, according to the Chachamim, not higher than 20 amas, is because if it's beyond that, you're not going to have the Laman Yedu Doiroi Sechem because you're not going to see. And then the question will be, why do they have to argue in both cases if it's really the same argument? We're going to learn the rule of the minimum height of the koida placement. It's quite low. It has to be 10 tvachim above the ground and not lower. Then we're going to learn about a machlokes regarding how long or how deep does the mavui have to be for us to be able to only use kishitas beis hillel, either a koida or a lechi, to properly enclose the mavui. If a mavui is even narrower or less deep, it's so short, then you're going to have a larger heker. Question is not what that larger heker is. That the Gemara is not going to speak about that on Daf Gimel, but the question will be, what is the minimum depth needed for us to apply the din of a mavui? My friends, we're going to learn various dinim of sukkah and various dinim of kalayim, all in the context of when we speak about an amma. So as the Gemara will establish today, we'll have other opinions, God willing, going in tomorrow, that there are different sizes of the measurement of an amma. According to Abaya, according to Rav Nachman, a amma sometimes will be a 5 tefach put together into an amma, bas chamisha. Other times an amma is comprised of 6 tefachim. And then we're going to go through the dinim that we're learning now. Again, we're learning about a mavui, we're going to be learning about sukkah, we're going to be learning about kalayim, and we're going to see, according to this version, that we don't always use the same length of an amma. Generally, whichever one will make a chumrah come out will be the one that's going to be used. Like just for example over here. Here we're giving a maximum height, and we're saying that if the kodah is placed higher than 20 amas, then the kodah will not be okay according to the chachamim. It's a chumrah to make these amas into 5. You understand? Because if the amma has 6 tfachim, then you are allowing the kodah to be placed even higher and still to function. Okay.
Just to visualize, how much is like an amma in feet?
An amma, very good. Hashem made the human body with all of these measurements. So an amma is from the edge of your middle finger, if you pick your hand up, all the way down to your elbow. This is an amma.
So about a feet and a half? About a feet and a half?
The amma is anywhere between 1.5 feet and 2 feet. Okay. We are on Daf Gimel, Amadal of 6 lines from the top of the Amad. I'll go Baal Peh, just go over the last step. So again, we have Rav holds, Chachamim hold, the din of a Pesach. How large can something be still called a Pesach and not oitz, a complete pirza? Pischoi shel heichel. Now, happens to be that on top of the Pesach of the Ulam, on top of the door of the Ulam, there was what we called a amaltira. There was some sort of beautiful pieces of wood that created a decor, and it really caught people's attention. So the Gemara is asking, again, based on the premise, that really the Pesach of the Heichel would have been also as big as the Ulam, but you need to have Teiras Pesach. If the amaltira gives it Teiras Pesach, then they would have been able to make it double the size, but they didn't, even though there was an amaltira, which means that an amaltira doesn't help. So the Gemara began to ask that why is the din, and it is the din, that if you have a mavli and you have the chayra above 20 amas, but if you have a amaltira, then that chayra is good. Why would it be good? That was the kasha in the Gemara, the top line of the Amid. Lo say hanele amaltira. And the Gemara were up to the place where the Gemara is saying that no, who says there was a amaltira on top of the Heichel? There was not. If there would have been, then indeed they would have been able to make it even taller and it would not have lost its Teiras Pesach. By the Heichel, there was no amaltira. By the Heichel. But if you have an amaltira, then you are able to have a bigger Pesach, a taller Pesach, and still it will retain Teiras Pesach. That's where we're up. Now the Gemara says, V'hai my kushya, it's very interesting. Normally a kushya meant a kasha. Here the Gemara is saying, no, kushya here means that what you used to, let's say, to deflect the question is not correct. I mean, the answer of the Gemara is only if there was no amaltira on top of the Heichel. How do you know that? Dilma Tavnus Heichel was Ketavnus Ulam. Maybe there was a amaltira, and when it says there were amaltirois in the Mishnah and Midrash, it does refer to both. And therefore, fragt the Gemara, this is just the same question. Allama Amar Rabbi La, in the name of Rav. That Rechava Dalid, we're going to learn 2 dinim. One is not related to anything we spoke about as of yet. We did mention in the intro that when it comes to a koira, unlike in Suras HaPesach, which is basically today's ERUVIN, there isn't a minimum width or strength of the string that goes on the top. But when you don't have a Suras HaPesach, when you just have the koira, there are dinim. One is that it has to be strong enough to carry on it, to hold on it, a half a brick. We'll learn about that later. There were standard sizes of the bricks. It means it has to be strong enough. So Rav says that if the koid is 4 amas, that's humongous wide, even though it's not bria, even though it's not strong, and it cannot support a half a brick, it's still a good koida. Guys, a lot more later about that. Number 2, this is in the name of Rav, that's negeta our sugya. The im yeshla amaltira, if you have this type of projection, design, protruding from the top of the koida, afilu gavaya yoysim yasramama. This is l'shitas chachamim einot tzarich lamayit. And if everything is from a pischoi shalulam, if the pischoi shalulam had an amaltira, and nevertheless they didn't make it bigger than 20 because they needed the Teiras Pesach, so why would it work? So Amar Rabbi Yosef, you are quoting this kasha right from Rabbi Law Amarav. You have it wrong. This latter statement, these 2 dinim of the width of the koida and then the amaltira is not in the name of Rav. That amaltira masni sahi or masni yasahi. It's a braisa. And you would say, oy gevalt, that's even worse. Hold on. First of all, it wasn't Rav that said it. And really what he perhaps was trying to say is, it's not Rav, and maybe it was a braisa that's corrupted. Corrupted means it's not authentic. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a good answer. Because who do you think learned that braisa? Man kitani la. Amar Abaye, we heard from Abaye that this braisa, including the din of an amaltira, was said in the name of Rav Chama, right? That's what we have the emendation here in the side. And therefore, it's authentic. It's not a corrupted braisa. So now, okay, so we can ask from a Braisa on Rav. Yes, we all know that the Gemara could always answer Rav, Tanahu, Upalik, but we try not to say that. And therefore, that it's a Braisa. So it's not a Kasha Rav on Rav. But still, if a Tanahu said that Lashitas Chachamim, putting the projection helps, it helps, so that's a Meya Kasha of Rav. Because if it's Midin Pesach, it should not have helped. Amalach Rav, when I've heard this question, he said, Gavaldik. Guys, there's one card that we have to keep up our sleeve over here. And that is that yesterday, we found a Braisa, in the middle of the Amid, the Tanya, I'm reading in Beis Amid Beis, that Mavi Shugavay Michaf Ama Yoiser Mi Pischoi Shal Heichal Yemai. The Braisa linked it to Pischoi Shal Heichal. So it says, Rav, Dalan Amahachi, why are you coming and asking me? Take me out of the equation. Masni Yasa Mi like Hashan Adadi? Okay, the statement is not Rabbi Law in the name of Rav. It's a Braisa. So Braisa on Daf Beis Amud Beis links the din of the height of the koiram to the Pischoi Shel Heichal. And let's go that the Pesach Shel Heichal had a Amaltera, which would mean that if it's higher than 20, it would not work. And on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, it's a Braisa that says that if there is this beautiful decor on top of the koiram, then it is allowed to be higher than 20. It's a contradiction. And it's a machlekes tanoim. So now, lididinami tanoihi. So when I gave my beard that we had to hold off yesterday, was according to the Tana that we have on the Beis Amud Beis, that yes, the din Pesach is learned from Pischoi Shel Heichal, and therefore, according to that, if there would be a Amaltera, it would not help. As in the Heichal, you had this beautiful Amaltera. Nevertheless, the Pischoi Shel Heichal was not as big as the Pischoi Shel Ulam because we need to have a din of a Pesach. Okay. Now, the way we will learn Pshat, Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, Amar, what he's really coming to say is not only to make a comment on the stira above, but really he has a whole different understanding in the Machlokes and the Mishnah. That Koira doesn't function midin Pesach. Koira functions mishum Hekera. It's nothing to do with the Pischoi Shel Olam. Now, based on that, let's go back. He says, "V'loi Rav." Without Rav, Masniyas Adodi Loi Kashem. There won't be a kash. Why is that? Because Lirabanan Koira Tamam Mai Mishum Ekera. Not Mishum Pesach. And Bahai Diktani. Now we're quoting Bryson number 1 from Daf Beis Amud Beis, that the Braisa says that if it's higher mipischoi shel heichel, it's not good. The Braisa doesn't mean to link it to the din of a Pesach. Haidik tani yasim mipischoi shel heichel is only simana ba'alma. But it's an amanic. How are you going to remember the shit of 20 amas? Remember it in pischoi shel ulam, but it's not midin Pesach. And since it's mishum ekeda, true, if there isn't something unique designed on, in, above the koira, it won't catch your attention if it's above 20 amas. But if there is something unique there, then people will look up. So it still will affect the hekeda, which is why we have today on Daf Gimel the other brisa that says that if there is a amaltera, then even l'chachamim, it's allowed to be higher than 20. Beautiful. Now that we introduce Shitas Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, now that we're saying that the machlokes here in ERUVIN between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda is about Hekeda. Notice, what does Rabbi Yehuda hold? Rabbi Yehuda holds that if something is higher than 20 amas, it still catches your eye. And you'll see, this is the end of the Mavi, that's the beginning of the Rosh Hashanah. According to this, the rationale, the underlying machlokes and sukkah is mamish the same, according to as the Gemara. So now the kasha will be, isn't it a machlokes, a parallel machlokes? Who needs it if it's so similar? As we'll explain in a moment, the way Rabbi explains the machlokes and sukkah. If he does not hold like Rabbi, then also is good and fine. Everything is fine and good. But if he will hold like that which Rabbi said in sukkah, and what did Rabbi say in sukkah? If it says a pasuk in Emor, in other words, there is a concept of the purpose of sitting in the sukkah. Of course, we're sitting in the sukkah because God Almighty gave us a mitzvah. That kavanah has to be. But nevertheless, we have, if the Torah in the Chumash gives a reason, Rabbi understands that we have to have that in our minds, that we need to remember by entering the Sukkah. And that's what Rabbi links to the Machlekes and Sukkah, between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda regarding the maximum height of the Schach. That Adas Ramama Adam Yodeya Shadar B'Sukkah. But L'mayla Mes Ramama, that Shitas Chachamim, Ein Adam Yodeya Mishum D'Lo Shalta Be'ena. So says Rabbi in Sukkah. So says the Gemara, Amma, what do we see? That Gaba Sukkah Nami Behekeda Pligi. So now the kasha is on Rav Nachman, not on Rav. L'Rav, there's no kasha. Here in ERUVIN, it's a machlokes mitzadin Pesach. As we explain, mamish, the details. Ultimately, we have this pasuk that's a non-pasuk. That's using the word Pesach, both the Heichal and the Ulam. And the question is, which one is an extension of which one, like we explained yesterday? Are we going in the Beis HaMikdash from west to east or from east to west? But according to the Nachman by Yitzchak, if Luge, Bekarte Lama, the Bach adds, Lahu. Why do we have to argue in two places when it's mamish the same argument as to, do you notice something that's above 20 amas? Machlekes Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda answers the Gemara, yes, tzricha, because the Yashmin and Gavas Sukkah had Rabbeinu HaKadosh only quoted their argument in Sukkah. I erroneously would have said that only Bahaka Amar Rabbi Yehuda, that yes, that even if it's above 20, you will notice the schach. What do you do in a sukkah? You sit, you go to sleep, you lay down. Kivin deli yeshiva avida. When you sit down, it makes sense. You're ruyig, you're sitting, you're relaxing. So then Sholta Ba'ena, Rabbi Yehuda, even above 20 amas. Abu Mavui, since the Lehiluchavit, people don't sit, they're walking. So maybe he would be moided to the Rabbanan that if something is above 20 amas, it's not going to catch your attention. That's number one. And in reverse, V'iyashmin and Baha had Rabbeinu HaKadosh only recorded the machlekes here in ERUVIN. Interestingly, this is the first time, but this is the second option in the Gemara. Baha ka'amri Rabbanan, same thing, but maybe because you're walking. But one would have thought Abel Bahach, but by Sukkah, since people dili yeshiva avida ema moidel Rabbi Yehuda, that you allow schach even above 20. So therefore, tzricha to record their argument in both cases. Now the Gemara wants to clarify my amaltira. What type of decor is it? Guys, the first white beginning of the first white line says Baravua that it's kine. Kine is miloshen kinin, right? Kinin. It's some sort of circular, semicircular design, like a half of a bird's nest, which is something more beautiful than the next option. It's something that attracts your eyes even more. And that in Marava, that in Eretz Yisrael, they say, even a paske d'arza, even if it's a very long beam, a much longer beam as it is usually used, that is also something that's going to cap your attention. And this is above the 20 ounce. Now, says the Gemara, Mandam a paske d'arza, kol shchei kine will be a good amaltira. However, Manda Ami Kine, keep the Kine is something more unusual, something maybe more beautiful. Now the Gemara says, what's the reason that it catches your eye? It's not something that's artistic, it's just a long beam. Because if something is very long, it's going to catch your attention. Now we have a good question. What about the schach? If that's the reason, okay. If you have schach above 20 amas, that's the chachamim. Why the schach goes all the way from one end to the other? And yet the Koren Rabbanan that what the law is so if it's above 20 amas, answers the Gemara no. It's not about it being long per se. Even the kachashiv islay column. Schach, it's usual. People have schach that covers sukkah from one end to the other. By the way, by the schach, you don't need to have one piece. It's not one piece. It's what schach. If someone makes in the building, if they insert some sort of decor that is unusual, something, lav dafka people would have noticed it if they wouldn't have heard about it. But it becomes the talk of the town. Wow, that person in that house, look what they did. So people go and look. It's more about people hearing that there was something beautiful there. This is what made people look. Going back in the Beis HaMikdash, people heard, wow, when you go to the Beis HaMikdash, take a look above the lintel. Take a look above the Pesach. You're going to see something beautiful. So people look. That's why for the schach, it's not good. But for the mavoi, It's going to be something unusual, even if it's not kinei, according to the Shita, it's going to help people look up, and it's going to remind them, here is the end of the Mavi and the beginning of the Rishus Harab. Now the Gemara has a Gavaldik technical question. Okay, what did we learn? We keep on repeating. The shiur is, if it's above 20, it's not good. You know, sometimes ad va'ad b'chlal, ad v'loy ad b'chlal. Here it's very clear what the Rebbe means. Mavui shehu gevoya me'esrim. Even if you take out the word loma, mavui means the koida that you placed at the entrance of the mavui. If it's higher, if it's 20, it's good. If it's higher, it's not good. What happens if it's half-half? Part. Some of it is 20 or less, but that's the entire koida is not within the 20. Some of the koida goes l'mayla miyesrim. And the same exact question, especially now that we're still following the Shita of Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, it's all because of Hekeda, Mixas Chach b'toich esrim, or Mixas Chach l'mayla miyesrim. What do we say? So guys, it's amazing. We're going to have two different versions of what Rabbi said, and we're going to use the logic, which we're going to explain any version. We're going to go menakotza la kotza. It shows how the human mind can understand the opposite rationales, and they all make sense. Amar Rabbi, the first version, b'mavui kasher, and b'sukkah pasul. According to this version of Rabbi, ma'ishnu b'mavui de kasher, and it must be because we say true. Some of the koida is above 20. Kolosh, thin it out, ignore it. In other words, we're not mechuyev to look at the koida as an indivisible unit. No, if some of it is above 20, ignore that. Some of it is 20, is good. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why does Rabbah differentiate by sukkah? Sukkah nami, there is chach 20. There's chach above 20, thin it out. Halachically ignore kolosh. Says the Gemara, you can't do that by schach, because equal shot. If you're going to thin it out, then you're not going to have enough schach if you ignore it. Gewaldig. Says the Gemara, well, that doesn't work, because hachinami equal shot. We just mentioned above that our minimum shiurim to the koida, we spoke yesterday, has to be a tefach wide. Then we learned today if it's 4. Maybe it was 4 tefachim. I don't know if it was 4 tefachim. Then even if it's flimsy, why? There's in the reverse. If you have a koida that's so light that even a regular wind can blow it away, it's not a good koida. Guys, we're not speaking about a tzuras HaPesach now. We're speaking about a koida. But if you're gonna thin it out, it's also not gonna have the minimum shiur. We're gonna say we don't have to thin it out. We don't have to thin it out. Well, all we're saying is that on one hand, it's one piece. It's on the other hand, we are only using the part that's within 20. But the part within 20, since it has connected to it another piece of koida, it makes it heavier. That nasu kishapudin shomateches, it becomes like a steak made out of metal. It means even though it's thin, it's heavy. We are halachically using only the part that's esrim. But at the end of the day, we are allowed to say, since it has connected to it another piece on top, so it's heavy. So we're back to the kasha by the schach. Why don't we say that nasis tzilas MERCAVA? Why? Because true, we have schach that's within 20. You have the lemanyedu deresechem, and then take the schach that's above it and still use it for this din. Like it should be the same. So Amar Rava mi parzakia. I'll tell you why. Sukkah is made primarily for a individual, and now when the schach is the way it is in the boya, you are allowed to use the one above, the schach above, to connect it to the schach below, to have the din of tzeilasa meruba mechamasa. But let me ask you something. What were to happen if the lower part of the schach will deteriorate? Will you notice that? Because if the lower part of the schach deteriorates and all you have left is the schach above from Esrim, then it's not kosher. So will you notice that? So a yachid might not notice it. He won't be mindful of it. And if that were to happen, then the sukkah will be possible. So the Chachamim said it's always possible. Mavui, since a Mavui is made for the Rabbim, what's the issue over here? Same issue. maybe the lower part of the koida will deteriorate and all you'll have left is the one above 20. But since many people go there, they will remind each other, guys, where did we just have this on Shabbos? Remember the towel? That if 10 people use one towel and therefore it's filled with water, we're not afraid that you're going to wring it out. And that's chita, because one will remind the other. If one person uses a towel or one person uses 10 towels, which means there's very little liquid in each towel, still be like midrabanan, don't carry that towel. We're not speaking about a hoitzah. A yachid will forget, he might wring it out. And many other times. It's amazing that in a few lines, we're going to flip this logic. But this is a logic now.
It's exactly the opposite from before. Before it's Schulte bei Eine in Sike. Like Rabbi said upstairs, that Schulte bei Eine in Sike, because you're there, you see. Here you don't see. Loi mitkar.
Okay, yeah, Shlomo is making another good point. That when we said before that since you're sit, Avida, the Yeshiva Avida, you'll notice more. I think it's a little bit different because here you have to be looking out for something else. You're going to see that the schach is there, but you're not going to notice that the lower hangings of the schach deteriorated. And by the way, I know today we have mats. When I grew up, when we had the green schach, it taka deteriorates. It thins out. All of the more naturals, they thin out during Sukkot. Now, everyone notices the Chamasa Meruma Mitzilasa, but do people notice the height? Maybe not. Now, listen to this, guys. Ravina says the opposite. I'm sorry, Ravina gives another logic in the version of Rabbi. Sukkah, Pasha, Sukkah de Oraisa, Achmir Gabar Rabbanan. Okay? Mavi de Rabbanan, Achmir Gabar Rabbanan, Amachai. Avada Bar Masno, Masne Lohosh Maitza de Rabba Itcha. He had another version as to what did Rabba Paskin regarding this boy. The opposite. Amarabba bin Mavoi. The Mavoi Pasul, Pumfakert, the Sukkah, since some of the schach is 20 or lower, the rest of it is above 20, and you need the rest for the shade, it's still kosher. And here they asked, Maishna Sukkah Diksheda. The answer must be, because Damrin and Kloish, we say that the fact that there's schach over 20, ignore that, thin it out. Disregard it. So the Mavinami Lema Kloish, and there is part of the Kaida is Esrim or under. So the Gemara says that you can't do that by the beam, you can't do that by the Kaida. E kol shat, Havale Kaida until it's Veruach. If you thin it out, then you have to completely disregard it. Then the Kaida will be too flimsy. So the Gemara says, Hachinami, E kol shat, to the point that you completely disregard it by the Schach, Havale Chamas Meruva Metzelas. El al Karchach, you have to say that yes, we ignore it to our advantage, but it's not that it's not there. That nasis say lasa meruva mechamasa. No, it's even though we are only focusing on the part of the schach that's under 20, 20 or under, which is why you have kosher schach. However, whatever is above it is only an extension of that which is below it, and therefore it's subservient to it, and it could be used in the making of the shade. So back to the kasha. Pachinami al karchach nasu. Only look at the kaida esrim ulamata. Don't look at the piece of the Koren that's above Esrim. But on the other hand, it's there, and it can be viewed as an extension of, and it adds weight to it. So it's like you have Shapudim Shamatechas, even though it's very thin, since it's strong, it's valid. So even if the part that's Esrim and under is, that part is thin, but it still has the weight, and has the koyach, because you are allowed to use the part that's on top. So we're back to the kasha. So Amar Rava mi Parzaki, according to this version, he said the opposite. Guys, listen to this. Since the Yachid, same Yachid, if you are the only one responsible for, if the buck stops with you, you will get the job done. He knows that this schach, some of it is above, some of it is below. I know that schach sometimes thins out, some of it deteriorates. Let me keep my eye on it. Because if the lower part deteriorates, I'm in trouble, and I'll take a look out for it. But a mavui, since it's made for the public, so how does it work if something is a communal responsibility? So samchi ahadadi, everyone relies on the other, and therefore no one will remember. The amri inshi, like people say, that that if a pot is being made by two partners, it won't be hot, it won't be cold. Or lahavdil, the way the expression here is, right? That two chefs, it's lashon over here, can't have two chefs in the kitchen. Anyways, who cares what? This is the expression that kedei devei shutfim leichamim v'lo kedir. Ravina Amar. Now here again, Ravina gives another insight, and again everything is the opposite, 180 degrees opposite. Before we said, sukkah deraisa, you're machmir. Right, Mavi derabbanan you're mekel. Now listen to now. According to this version in Rabba, says Ravina to explain Rabba, sukkah deraisa leboya chizik. Mavi derabbanan boya chizik, and you have to be more machmir. How great is that? Last line of the Amid. My hava. What's the halacha? We don't even know what Rabba said. What's the halacha? So it's easy now. Rabba baravula Amar zev zev pasul, for whatever the reason. And Rabba Amar, and you see the little dalit from the A Mishpat 9 Mitzvah. This is both the way that Rambam paskins, right? My monadies, and we have the Smag, and we have the Torah, and we have the Shulchan Aruch. Zev zeh kasher, and Rabba gives a reason why zev zeh kasher. And when you read the reason, you say, aha, Daf Gimel Amud Beis. He says you didn't understand the Mishnah. The whole question is not a question. Halal sukkatanan. Halal mavitanan. Mamash moiridik. Look inside the top Rashi. When you hear this, you chap, the whole boya taka is not a boya. It becomes almost like kash on the whole Rabba and Ravina. Halal sukkatanan. When it says Rashi, esrim ama shehuskiru bein b'mavi bein b'sukkah. What is needed? Remember, I just mentioned ad va'ad b'chlal. You know what's needed? The cholol has to be 20. Even if the entire cholol is 20, you know what that means? That means that the koida, the lowest part of the koida, is already above 20. It's still good. So what was the boya? If some of the koida is in the 20th and some of it is above, are you good or not? Says Rabbi, what are you talking about? When the Mishnah says mavui shuhu gevayam, listen, the Mishnah didn't say koida. The Mishnah said mavui. Mavi means the ear space. The Mishnah says that if the ear space is more than 20, if the ear space is more than 20, that's when you have to lower the koida. If the ear space is exactly 20 from the ground until the lowest part of the koida, only cholol, it's still good. In other words, the Mishnah is speaking about a case where the entire koida is l'mayla masrim, and it's still good, as long as it is exactly l'mayla masrim. So avade, if some of the koida or some of the schach goes 1 millimeter into the asrim, of course it's good. Let's go, I have an ayah. Quoting again, the Braisa we learned on that base and base. Says the Braisa, Mavui shu gavoyim asrim ama, and moya means the entrance of the mavui, meaning the koida, but again, it's the word mavui. Mavui shal asrim. And as we learned, Beis, meaning Yoiser mipischoi shel heichal, you might. Very good. So whether this is Keshitas Rav, that it's Midin Pesach, whether Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says it's just a Simona Ba'alma, doesn't matter. We compare it to the Pesach. Let's go to the Pesach Shel Ulam. My friends, we spoke yesterday. The Pischoi, Shel Heichal. The Pischoi Shel Heichal, when we said it's 20 tall and 10 wide, what's Pshat 20 tall? The Pesach of the Heichal, not Pshat that the lintel wasn't the 20th Amma. The opening, the Cholol, was 20 Ammas tall. Gavaldik. The Heichal Gufay, Chaloloi was Esrim. Not that the lintel, the Mashkait wasn't the 20th. So B'meila, for sure, Rava says, how great is that? Says the Gemara, Eisvei, Rav Shimi, Baravashi, Rav Papa. Steht in Abraisa, Ketzad, Hoya, Oysa, Maniach, Koira, Misvas Esrim, Ulamata. It says in another Braisa that when you place the Koira, you place it on the boundary of 20 Amas, and Ulamata. What did we just say right now? That the entire Koira, none of it has to be in Esrim. None of it has to be in Esrim. You know, it should have said, you put it by the edge of the Esrim, which would mean the upper edge Ulamayla. That would work. But the Braisa says Ulamata. So indeed, the only answer will be you have to amend the Braisa. Ema Ulamayla, then it works. Because then the Sfas Esrim means the Koira is by the boundary of the top of the Esrim. And we don't want to change the word in the Braisa. So the Gemara says, no. Lamata means something completely different. Lamata means, we learned, we just started, but we're learning about the maximum height of the koira. What about a minimum? Now you would think, well, come on, it's common sense. Who would put a koira so low that when you'll bump into it? Okay, but if someone put a koira that low, there is a minimum of 10 tfachim. If the koida is placed lower than 10 tfachim, then it's not good. And now the Bryce is saying that the din of the lamata has to be kalamayla, which means mamish the way Rava said, mamish the way Rav Papa backed up Rava. That malamayla means the halala esrim. None of the koida has to be in the 20 amas. You can have a full 20 amas vacuum chalal. The koida is above it. This minimum share of lamata, the koida, you need to have at least 10 tfachim of empty space. Okay, and here we start. So guys, it's going to be a Abaya Mishmei Rav Nachman versus Rava Mishmei Rav Nachman. What are we going to be speaking about? We're going to be speaking about shiurim, and we're going to have, my friends, it's Pashut Gishmak, Dinei shiurim, and we're going to go into other dinim as well. An amma, the measurement that we're using, esrim amois, like we mentioned in the intro, sometimes according to Abaya Mishmei Rav Nachman, an amma is comprised of 5 tvachim, smaller ammas. Sometimes an amma is comprised of 6 tvachim. And now he's giving you the following klal. Amma Abaya in the name of Rav Nachman. Amma sukkah, when we learn Mesachta Sukkah, Hilchas Sukkah, and we speak about the measurement of an amma, as we just quoted the first Mishnah in Sukkah, Machlekes Chachamim, and Rabbi Yehuda regarding the schach, 20 ammas for the schach. Likewise, the ammas that are mentioned in Mavui, there we are speaking about the smaller ammas, ba'ammas bas chamisha. However, says Abaye in the name of Rav Nachman, whenever we are learning the dinam of an amma in the din regarding the dinam of kalayim, kalayim means that one is prohibited to plant greens or grains in a vineyard. We had some of these dinim guys in Masechta Shabbos. First of all, it doesn't go on an orchard. We also learned something very interesting that we'll repeat Bekitzer, that some of kalayim mida oirais is connected to marasayin. It's not only that the greens and the grain should not be yoinik together. It's that when people look at it, it should not look like it was planted by ERUVIN. And as we'll see some pratim very negay over here. Whenever we have a shiur of an amma, dear, it's ba'amas bashisha. And why is that so? As we'll explain, because we always go l'chumra. How is it l'chumra? We're going to speak it out. Now it happens to be that we learned in our Mishnah 2 dinim of a mavi, right? The height and the width. But let's learn other dinim of a mavi. Says the Gemara, Amas mavi ba'ama bas chamisha l'may hilchasa. And let's go even more. L'may hilcha said, Abaya Rav Nachman, that's l'chumra to make it smaller, l'goyvay. And indeed, if we would have used an amma bas shisha, right, that would have allowed you to place the koida even higher, making the amma smaller, it lowers the maximum height. That's a chumrah. Likewise, ulepritzas mavi, the second in the Mishnah, right? The width cannot be more than 10 amas. Here also, if we would use a 6 tefach amma, then you would be allowed to keep a larger opening in the width. We're minimizing it. It's a chumrah. The problem is, as the Gemara, there's another din in mavoi where there, to be machmer, you have to go to a 6, not to a 5. Meshach means the depth. How deep does the mavi need to be minimum for you to only need a lechi and a koida? You can have a mavi, unusual mavi, that has less depth, but there you'll need to have more than just a lechi and a koida. So we learned ba'arba amos. And now if we're going to be using the smaller amos, that will make a kulam. Here, l'chura, Rav Nachman should have said that you have to do 6. So the Gemara gives 2 answers to that. Number one, that the reason why Abaya quoted Rav Nachman without making such a differentiation, he made a standard by the dinam of a mavi, it's bas chamisha, because Rav Nachman holds that there is a minimum depth of a mavi not connected to amas. It's connected to tvachim. Happens to be much less. Command the amar about tvachim. So we don't use any amas measurement for us to have to question, is it a amma bas chamisha bashisha or the iboy yisema? No. That Rav Nachman also holds that the minimum depth of a mavui for which only the lechi, only the koida suffices, is ba'arba amas. So really there are 3 dinim, b'negeh the mavui, that for which you have to use an amma: height, width, and depth or length. And when Abai is quoting Rav Nachman bas chamisha, he meant v'roiv amas. From these 3, 2 of the 3, which is the 2 that we learned, bas chamisha, But you know what? For the depth, for the meshach, you have to use bashish. Well, next. Amasuka. Here also, Abaya says in the name of Rav Nachman, Ba'ama bas chamisha and Lamay Hilchasa, same thing. Ligoiva, 20 amal chachamim. The schach cannot be higher. The chalal cannot be higher than 20. And again, making the amas bas chamisha is a chumrah, which is what we're looking for. And to the din of doifen akuma, guys, amachaya, some hilchasuka. When you have an empty space in the schach and the sukkah of 3 tfachim or more, you got yourself a problem. However, if it's not an empty vacuum in the schach, but you have non-kosher schach inside the good schach, as long as the non-kosher schach is adjacent to one of the walls, we are allowed to view that non-kosher schach as part of the wall, ki'ilu the wall is bent over, and as long as it is within 4 amas from the side wall, which is a lot, so if adjacent to any wall you have non-kosher schach going a drop less than 4 amas, we say that doesn't render the sukkah puzzle. We view that as part of the wall. It's called the din of the doifen akuma. And here also, what are we saying? By making the amma smaller, we're being machmir, because we're not allowing more, we're allowing only less. So that's good. But here again, there's a kasha. But there's another din. What's the other din? Now we know halachically a sukkah only has to be 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim. That's not a kasha. That's really a machlekes tanoim. There is a shita that holds that a sukkah has to be minimum 4 amas by 4 amas. Might the shir of amas. So here also, meshach sukkah. Meshach here doesn't only mean the depth; it means the depth or the length and the width. And there, let's go with the shita that says it has to be 4 amas. Now here, if you are saying that it's 5, right? 5 is a kula because you are allowing a smaller sukkah to be kosher. A chumrah would mean you have to have a little bit bigger, minimum bigger. So the Gemara, the Tanya, Rabbi Yomer, Omer Ani, Kol Sukkah She'emar Dalad Amas Adalad Amas Psula. So that's a kasha on Abaya Rav Nachman. Answers the Gemara. Mamish like before. Number 1, well, Rav Nachman doesn't subscribe to Shitas Rabbi. He holds like the Rabbanan. That holds the Amrin and Afilo Eina Machzekas El Rosh Verubai, the Shulchanai, which is 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, it's already kosher. So there are no shiurim connected to Amas, Binegeh B'Meshach. Number 2, the Iba Yisema, you're right. He could have taken a hold like Rabbi. Nevertheless, when he said Abai Mishmei Rav Nachman that Amas Sukkah is Bas Chamisha, he meant it right Amas Ka'amad, 2 out of the 3, mamish like before. And now, my friends, an opportunity to learn, to review. For all of us, we are reviewing. We had a nida that we all learned the whole Torah already. We forgot it. We have to rechazit it. That there are dinim by kalayim. Amas kalayim. The rule is that they're using an amma bashisha brings about the chumrah. Now, where do we have shiurim of amos v'negeh kalayim l'mayel chisem? Number 1 says the Gemara to the din of korachas hakerem. Korachas means a clearing in a vineyard. I'll explain this in a moment. Number 2 to the din of a mechoil hakerem, the perimeter outside of the vineyard. What does that refer to? So let's speak it out by heart, and then we'll go inside. When you don't have a vineyard, when you have just vines together, if it's not halachically a vineyard, and you want to plant adjacent to it grains or greens, which cannot be mixed in together, all you need to do is keep them 6 tvachim apart. But when you have a kedem, then since it's a kedem, there's a maras ayin aspect. If you were to plant it 6 tvachim or 7 tvachim, it will look like it's mixed together. You have to leave a much larger space, and that's a space of 4 amas. Why 4 amas? Explain to you why 4 amas. Because people need 4 amas to be able to bring the gear that they used to plow and to harvest. The oxen and the klei hamachresha took up the width of 4 amas. So when you leave 4 amas around the field, that is what the minimum that separates the field from that is going to be outside of it. Now, what happens if within a field, karachas means a bald spot, there is an opening. So if you can just picture a field and make in the middle of the field an opening. So really what you have now, you have 2 fields. Let's say the one on the top and the one on the bottom, if I'm looking at it like a vant. So like this, each half needs to have first 4 amas adjacent to it, because that's the rule of a kedem. You have to have 4 amas. So 4 amas on the top, 4 amas on the bottom. It's already 8 amas. Now there's another din. For you to be allowed to plant grains or greens, it has to be planted in an area that has a din of a sada. How large is that? Machlokes Beishamai and Beisilo. Either you need to have a minimum of 4 amas to consider that piece of land a standalone field, Beisilo, or Beishamai says 8 amas. And now one more detail. Even though according to Beisilo 4, according to Beishamai 8, when you have a korachas, what you need to do is you have to have this center in which you are allowed to plant grains, because you have above it the 4 amas and below it the 4 amas. You have to be able to have it doubled. So if I need 4 amas, I need to have 8 amas. Why do I need to have 8 amas? Because if someone looks at it, he might think that part of the center is part of the field above. The other part is part of the field below. And I want for each part in itself to have a din of a sada. So if the minimum din of a sada is 4, then you have to have the center of 8. So 4, 8, and 4 is a 16 korachas, and you can plant in the 8 greens or grains. According to Beishamai, that the minimum size of a sada is 8, double it, because again, since it's in between 2 fields, as maras ayin, a person will think that the center is connected to both sides, one half to the one above, one half to the one below, and we want for each one to have a standalone din of a sada. So 8 and 8 is 16, so it's going to be 4, 16, and 8. Let's read it now inside. The Tanan, right, the second to last narrow line, if you have this empty space in the middle of a vineyard, Beishamai says if it has the length of 24 amas, that's 4 boundary to the field on top, 4 to the field below, plus 16, that's 24. Then you can plant in the middle 16. Beisilo has a lesser shiur for a din sada, only 4. But the formula is the same. It's going to be 4, 8, and 4. Again, 8 because we're dividing that in half. Okay. Even before you chazah this, just you see there's a din of an amma. Now again, over here, when you make the ammas bigger, that's a chumrah. Because if you have less than that space, then you can't plant anything in between. So it works. So making the amma bashisha is making a chumrah. Next din, also where it's l'chumrah, the first wide line, is not that there's a bald spot in the middle of the field. But let's say there is a wall somewhere. There's a wall somewhere. And guys, no one planted within 4 amas of a wall because you would have to plow those areas, and the plowing near the wall would weaken the wall. So hold that 4 amas there. Same concept. So you have a kedem, and then you have a wall, and there is some area between the kedem and the wall. That's the mechoil hakedem. How much area do you need for you to be allowed to plant there grains or greens? Same concept. Beishamai says 16 amas. How do you get to 16 amas? Because for the wall you need to have 4 amas that people don't plow empty. You need to have on the edge of every kedem 4 amas. So how much Beishamai? What's the minimum size field? 8, we said. So 8 and 4 is 16. According to Beisilo, the 4 near the wall is a metzias. The 4 near the kedem is a din. The din of a sad is only 4. 4 and 4 is 12. So let him shame as amas. And now the Mishnah explains. And now we're speaking out obviously shitas Beisilo that ain't sham sheis esrei amas lo yamas at all sham. But hoyuloi sheis esrei amas. Then yeah, noiseloi kedei avidasai. Noiseloi kedei avidasai means leave a empty space of 4 amas for each of the 2 fields because you cut it in half. That's kedei avidasai. And then v'zurei asamoiser. According to Beisilo, it's the middle 8 amas. The Ezeu mechoil akedem, and on the side, mechoil akedem, perimeter of a kedem, that it means a area bein kedem together. And there the din is leBeisilo that ein sham shtei esrei amos lo yavi zera l'sham, but hoyu sham shtei esrei amos or more. Then again you have to leave noisim like kedei avidasoi. See, it's interesting. He doesn't write kedei avidasoi kedei avidasoi. Noisim like kedei avidasoi means here it's only for one side. You need to leave 4 amas adjacent to the field. There is another 4 amas near the wall, not for halachis, but people left it there not to destroy the wall. So 4 and 4, and Vizadeya as Hashad, you can plant in the other 4. What's good here, again, we have 2 dinim, and in both these 2 dinim, making the amma bigger renders a chumrah, because if you have lesser space, you cannot plant zera. Asks the Gemara, mamish like before, but there is a third din by the Kedem. The ha'ikar tzufim ba'arba amos. Whenever you have a vineyard, like we mentioned, it is only there that you have to leave 4 amas on its parameter, because that's needed la'avodas hakedem. Whenever you have not a vineyard, you just have individual vines.
It's perimeter.
Perimeter. So that when the perimeter of 4 amas is from a vineyard. If you have halachically individual vines, you only have to leave a space of 6 tvachim. So now, fragt the Gemara, there is the case of ritzufim ba'arba amas. What's ritzufim ba'arba amas? What defines a vineyard? So here's a machlokes tanoim. You have lines, you have rows of vines. And like we mentioned, the klei machresha occupies 4 amas. In an ideal kedem, one would leave in between each row 4 amas. What happens if someone didn't do it? They planted the vines closer to each other, the rows closer to it. That's called ritzufim ba'arba amas. There isn't arba amas in between each row. And over there, using an amma of bas shisha will bring a kula. That's a kasha. And what is the din over there? The tnan kedem al pachos ma'arba. You have less than 4 amas in between each row. And Rav Shimon says that since people cannot plow in between it, it loses its halacha of a kedem, and therefore, if you want to plant near the perimeter, zeta, greens, you only need to separate 6 tvachim. There's no din of you have to leave around it 4 amas. The Chachamim say, even though you didn't make enough space in between the rows, we still give it a toida of kedem. You know why? Because the owner who wants to make the most of his land will end up destroying every second row. He's going to end up plowing. He's going to benefit more. It's going to be kavik kedem. Now, what's the kasha? The kasha is that according to Rav Shimon, right, he's using that if there isn't arba amos, a leniency comes out. If you're going to make an amma of 6 tvachim, this in alone is a kula. What happens if you have 4 amas if it's bas chamisha? Which means that if it's bas chamisha, it is a kedem. Then you would have to leave 4 amas and the perimeter. Now that you're saying that the am is bashisha, there isn't 4 amas in between the rows bashisha, so Rav Shimon a kula comes out. So answers the Gemara mamish like before. Number 1, Abaya Amar Rav Nachman can follow the Rabbanan that say it's still a kedem. The shiur, right? B'chlal, we don't care about that. There is no in between the rows. So the only dinei amais is where making it a bashisha makes a chumrah, not a kula. Or the Vayisema Lo'olam Rav Shimon. Mamish like before. Nevertheless, the Roiv Amois Ka'amar. The Nakoda is from the 3 cases of Tanach Hazakedem and Mechoyel Hakedem and Ritzufim. From 2 of the 3 is where he meant Bashisha. But the Nakoda will be is that you have these 2 shiurim of Amos, Bas Shisha, Bas Chamisha, and Abaya has a girsa that Rav Nachman is saying that you always use the measurement that brings about a chumrah. That's simple. But let's just start one line. Let's start one more line. Rabbi in the name of Rav Nachman doesn't have the 5 and 6. He also knows that you have 2 different types of amos, but the difference between both of them are not as much as, what are they? Look at these words. Kol amos, ba'ama bashisha. All amos are bashisha. However, yes, you have 2 different shiurim, and halalu, meaning for kalayim, soichakos. Panam soichakos means a smiley face. What's a smiley amma? When a person smiles, hopefully at least a little bit of their lips part. When a person is very sad or depressed, they clench their lips. This is a shem hamushal b'negei the fist. A tefach is a fist. Like I mentioned, an amma is from the tip of your middle finger, from the end of your middle finger until the end of your elbow. And a tefach is your fist, a closed fist. Now, if your fist is closed tightly, it's going to be smaller. If your fist is soichakos, it's smiley, there's a little bit of a space between the fingers, then it's larger. Same concept, but much smaller of a difference. Halalu soichakos, the larger shiurim, which is by kalayim, that is a larger tefach. And halalu for mavli and for sukkah, it's not bas chamisha, but atzavis, it's 6. But the 6 are sad, are smaller. The Gemara doesn't even have to go back and forth here by Rava. because we already have the back and forth. All of the kashas and all of the terutzim will be mamish the same. So we're going to leave over here machloikas between Abaye and Rava b'shitas Rav Nachman as to what are the two options of amos that we have that willing to be continued. Easier than Shabbos so far. Piece of cake, guys. L'chaim.
Rabbi,
Chaim, have a good Shabbos.
Rabbi, this whole Amma difference of 5 or 6 today, do we use this, or we have one Amma measurement? No.
Now you can better appreciate that when you have all of these, like in Zmanim by shiurim, there's a big machlokes. In our generation, we worded Rabbi Avram Chaim Noah and the Chazon Ish, let's say, but it's many more.
Right, but that's based on the size of a tefach, no? But everybody agrees that there's no two different Amma measurements that we're looking at in terms of, this has to be a large Amma, this is small Amma.
Yes, we do that.
We do.
Yes, we do. That's why people always say approximate. Amma, we go approximate as a foot and a half. But for other certain dinim, we cannot rely on the foot and a half. We're going to have to do 1.8. And those who have bigger shiurim sometimes use an amma as in 2 feet. The nakuda that we're learning is halacha lamaisa, that whenever it varies and we apply it l'chumra. That's, everyone is saying that over here. That's what we learned today. By the way, by zmanim also. By zmanim we apply it l'chumra. We're not so affixed. Like a shkia mincha by Yastal, Rebbe says we rely on the shitas leaning and the opinions. But for other shiurim, like for the end of a fast, we're more machmir. When to determine when tzeis is v'chulei. We have this concept by shiurim that it's not even halacha l'mais. It's not
why
one.
By zmanim the Rabbeinu Tam is like the most machmer or whatever. Nobody holds like that.
People, in other words, very good. Even the people, very good example that take out Shabbos b'shkias Rabbeinu Tam, but they don't put on tefillin until shkias Rabbeinu Tam.
Right.
They using it l'chumra.
Got it. Shkoyach.